basically live and get new job opportunities without moving. So the whole settlement structure, which was originally purely agricultural, became a sort of mixed use industrial. And the last one, do you know where this is? It's here, Belgium. And here also you recognize a number of elements like a church, railways, very important in Belgium. So you have a sort. I think some of you were at Wart Verpakel's PhD defense on Monday. He was looking at villages. So here you see a nice example of a village usually organized around the church. But in the meantime, you have a station, having railways, and development happening along existing roads, and also a number of new allotments that would happen as sort of appendix where space is available. Something which is also different from the other cases is the presence of trees. So because forest is a resource, and it's one of the factors that made Belgium so attractive for development. So let's have a look at yes, the way Belgium is represented as world city. It's quite Miami. You see Brussels, which is a little dot compared to London and Paris. But if you look at the word population density, then it's in fact quite recognizable. This is Paris, London, and yeah, this is what we call a cloud, a sort of nebulous area. This is Belgium, and the population density is also almost literally matching with the footprint of built-up areas. So if we zoom in, you see it's almost completely blue, light blue to dark blue. Only Brussels has a significant density. And you can recognize some lines. So this is the east-west industrial axis in Wallonia. And it's following a river, but also coal mining sites. So in the 18th, 19th century, this was really the driving force for economy, the coal extraction, and then all the other industries. Brussels, Antwerp, Ghent, and then in between these three cities, it's called the Vlaamse Rijk. As a sort of, it has more or less the shape of a diamond. And this is really an interesting place where you have also this diffuse, dispersed urbanization. So a number of researchers have tried to understand, a bit like the Italians did for the città diffusa, how they did develop, what were the behind that, and in order to be able to respond to it, to improve. So here's a number of articles. One interesting is from 1910. It was a guy from the government coming to learn from other countries. So the book is called Land and Labor, Lessons from Belgium. And he gave a very precise description of what he could see. And then from the 80s, we had here, in fact, at the university, a number of researchers trying to also decompose, understand this diffuse urbanization process in Belgium, including Marcel Smets, who was the main professor here and became Bouwmeester. Bruno de Mulder also focused a lot on this. At UC Louvain, Bénédicte Grosjean wrote a very nice book called Urbanization Without Urbanism. It refers to a book called Architecture Without Architects from the 60s, we mentioned earlier in this course, but in this case applied at the urban scale. And a number of PhD researchers, including mine, looking at different factors that have stimulated this dispersed development. So here's a list of factors that made this development possible. First of all, is the favorable geographic conditions. So these are pictures from my PhD, comparing the urban, we'll use sprawl for now, but so urban dispersion and the hydrological structure. So almost all of Flanders corresponds to the basin of the Scheldt River. And if you look at historic maps, you will see how the Scheldt is, in fact, very navigable. It could be seen, it was described in old articles as a big inland harbor. So you could, from the sea, you could go very deep in the land. So along the Scheldt itself, but then also along one of the tributary rivers. So you have Leuven is here on the bed, and Leuven was the point you could reach with the boat from the sea. So it's like the deepest point you could reach. And the same logic is for Brussels and for, I think it's Ninove or Aalst. So all these cities, and you understand it here on the cross section, from the sea to the ridge of the catchment, you could easily get with a boat very deep in the country. And that point, which corresponds to Leuven, Brussels, Aalst, was the place where you had to shift to road infrastructure transport. So as a country, it's like really a large harbor and therefore very attractive for development. But still, it doesn't really explain how it dispersed. So you recognize clearly every city center, town center, they are literally on the river system. But then in between, you also have many other factors that contributed to make it even more spread out. So the second factor is the land structure, the parcels, the plot, which is very fine meshed. So this Englishman who came in 1910 said that the average size of the plots in Belgium is smaller than any other country of Europe. So you see from the Ferraris map for the 1775, a typical part of the territory. So the size of each field is very small in comparison to other contexts. And it's because the soil condition is very good, very fertile, meaning that one household could survive with a very limited amount of square meters. So you have the very strong division, and also many houses. So you recognize in red, there were many houses, and from long time ago, so we have a kind of old dispersion. And also it has persisted very much, and because you see the picture in the middle are the houses today, and they still follow the original pattern of these small fields, and are, as you see, very homogeneously distributed. And this layer of division of the land and first settlements was, like in China, supporting the wave of industrialization. So the Industrial Revolution brought some new factories, cities expanded, but also the countryside densified in this process. Yes?
I have a question. With this privatization, will there also be like commons between people where they would be shared public open spaces for farmers as well, or was it very early on quite divided?
Yes, that's a good question. I know all the valley, for instance, were collectively managed, so they were not owned. You had also in the village often a large open space in which they would bring the animal, the cows, to protect them at night from the wolves. So you had, and you still recognize it in some villages. Forests, I think the forests were often owned by big families. What I know is that the valleys were shared and not all privately owned. But there has been a division. Also for my research, I looked at old land property maps, and it was very early on divided. So yes, somehow privatized, and which is yeah, this is what we recognize here, but not 100%.
Yeah.
And the third factor was the transportation structures before the car. So the map you see at the bottom here is the network of railways, so trains and tram. We had what we call a vicinal railway system that would connect basically all villages. And so we were the biggest producer of railways in the world for a long period. And it was because we had the technology, we could develop such an amazing network. But there was also an ideology behind it, that the government was mainly Christian Democrats, and the model was to have the family in the countryside and avoid to have too many people in the city. So the idea of organizing this public transportation network was to allow people to live where they were and to, if needed, commute to their working place, but avoid rural immigration to the city center. So this amazing map here, also a comment from this British guy who said that we had the smallest plots in Europe, but we had also the biggest railway infrastructure. So he says there's no country that has so great lengths of railways in proportion to the size than Belgium. So we were champions in two things: small plots and lots of railways. So the railways were there, but we had also roads from early on. Benedict Grosjean, I mentioned earlier, talks of Belgium as a crossroad country, territory. You had these many important stateway, stoneways from the Romans, from the Austrian who occupied the country for long. They also developed many of these straight big roads. So in terms of infrastructure, we have been always very equipped and therefore very easy to reach any point, and therefore urbanization would be very distributed. And a last combination of factors is the planning aspect and the policies. What Bruno de Mulder uses as a term is laissez-faire. It's a French word to say just let it go, no control. So a kind of laxist spatial planning approach, partially because of the culture that we are suspicious of any kind of authority in Belgium, because in fact the first legal framework was only published in 1962. Before that it was completely improvised, and the country, as you know, is also very much divided in many municipalities, so no coordination. And the result is that you could basically build your house wherever you wanted, as long as you get along with the mayor. So that's one thing, very laxist kind of spatial planning, very little control until the 60s. And on the other hand, a very individualized policy and subsidies. So for instance, in terms of transportation, you had this tramway network, and the government would sponsor tickets, so the workers could travel almost for free to go to work. And also for housing, while for instance after World War II there was a big shortage of housing in France. We saw there were these new housing ensemble around the cities. In the Netherlands, many countries, big investments by the governments to provide housing in a coordinated way, and big estates. While in Belgium, the decision was made to just give money to every family, to let each one build or renovate or rent a house. So this is also a factor of distribution, that there was no concentration at that moment. Anyone could just buy a house, and there were many companies that would propose not prefabricated, but let's say a catalog of house, and so the construction sector in Belgium has always been very much individualized and then also implemented by private companies. And you see here the result, how since there was no public investment in infrastructure, at least for the housing, that it mainly happened just taking advantage of the existing road infrastructure. So this is what we call the ribbon development in Belgium, which is still very recognizable here, is that if you just get money to build a house, you will not build the road, so you just put it where the road is. And therefore we have these linear developments along the main roads, and it's constantly densifying. You see three colors there. One is before 1950 in black, in gray it was between 1951 and 80, and in red are the more recent developments, and they just follow the same pattern. Yeah.
When was exactly this house allowance?
That was 1947. 48. It's called the tire. That's the name of the minister who proposed this mode of subsidy. So it's this paternalistic, also Christian Democrat idea of return or stay in the countryside instead of having people moving to the city. Yes.
I was wondering if there's also a phenomenon that happened here with the development of the railway system, where certain individuals with farms would negotiate for a station on their property, because in South Africa there are whole towns that existed just because a farmer negotiated for their stuff. And I was wondering if something like that also happened here.
For stations, you had this tram, so that would really stop at every hamlet.
Yeah.
But what you say also resonates with the highway. For instance, if you compare the highway system in France, you have an exit every 10 or 15 kilometers only. In Belgium, it's every 3-4 kilometers, because the highways were financed by the municipalities, so every municipality wanted to have an access to it. So the highways is also very much yes, annexes. So this is a series of factors that explain why Belgium is so spread out, not concentrated like in France or the Netherlands, and therefore creates this unique landscape, but also many issues. Like if you think of public transport, it's very difficult to know where the bus line should pass by and stop. In terms of infrastructure, sewer system, electricity, it's a huge amount of money that just gets, Sorry? Ecological management? Yes, also, so it's very fragmented, although it depends maybe on which scale you look at that, but let's say major ecological corridors are fragmented because of this. But you do have, since we all have benefit from larger gardens, then it's also another form of ecology at the smaller scale. But so for instance, the former Bouwmeester, Leo van Broek, is very much has to solve this, but it's, as we saw, it's very deeply rooted in the mode of living in Belgium. It's been like this for 200 years. Some planners dream to make to import the Dutch model, which is much more compact, much more efficient. But it has so many historical, cultural factors behind it that it's very difficult. So it's important when you work in a context to understand, again, where does it come from, how is it related to the specific conditions, physical, cultural, and political. Let's move to this. I think I have too many slides today, so maybe I'll skip some. Because I said, so this dispersed urbanization process was seen as mainly as a problem, like escaping the city and developing in a very unstructured way. But interestingly, at a time in history, a number of planners and thinkers were supportive of this mode of very dispersed, decentralized urbanization. So these were the models we discussed in a former lecture at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, how cities could expand with this huge wave of people moving to the city with industrialization. We saw Osman, we saw Barcelona, the model of the linear city, the satellite towns in the UK, the invention of the zoning with the cité industrielle, in order to organize, structure this growth. But a number of people were also thinking that growth could be spread out across the entire territory. This, I think I will not read everything in detail, but let's say there have been a number of more philosophical and conceptual approaches, including from Kropotkin, who wrote this book called Fields, Factories and Workshops. And this was very much in the idea of being egalitarian, to, again, distribute opportunities for everyone. The industries must be scattered, because the concentration in a few places would be synonymous with concentration of power and control. So this is, Kropotkin is considered as the anarchist thinking, and so he was defending the idea of having the spread of the productive places and the working places all over the territory to distribute equality, opportunities equally. Patrick Geddes, who was a biologist, also was very critical of the fast expansion of cities, which he defines as conurbation, so how urbanization between cities would create monsters. He talks of New York, Chicago as dinosaur cities, because he sees that at the same time these cities become gigantic, but there are also technological innovations like transport, electricity, telephone, that according to him would allow you to live not in a city, and then avoid these problems of congestion, inefficiency. So he shows this here on the left, like this is what he sees of the problem. Cities were growing. He says we should attack this phenomenon by bringing nature back inside the city. But his main point is that we should think of the future of urbanization at the regional scale. So he defined this notion of natural region. So instead of trying to make life a little more tolerable in the congested centers, the concept of natural region attempts to determine what sort of equipment are needed in the new centers spread across the region. So it's a bit what happened in Belgium or in the Dakota in China, is let's try to make people stay where they are in the countryside and bring there the facilities. And his point is also to keep this linkage between how people live and the geographic conditions of the different parts of the region. And this is shown in this very famous cross-section, the valley section, which has different versions. This is one, where you see how each part is linked to a certain productive activity, from fisher to peasant, hunter, miner. So it was at that time quite different from the conventional mode of thinking, which was all about cities growing, making cities grow and rationalize cities. He said we should look at this phenomenon at the scale of the entire region and link it to the natural aspects and the geographical aspects. So one of these motto is survey before plan. Very important to understand a region, its geography, history and culture as the basis of urban planning, and promote the idea of using cross sections. And the little tower you see there is a observation tower. It's a camera obscura, where you can look in through a lens and observe the entire region. as a sort of also a tool to observe and describe, understand a region before planning it. So he's seen as the father of regional planning, and all this movement of protecting large open space and nature protection owes a lot to his theory of natural region. I'll check time. Yeah, I've been talking for 1 hour already. But yes, okay. My voice is also weakening. Maybe I'll try to also re-round this up so that I'll be faster. A group of architects, economists, developers, and journalists, including Lewis Mumford, they were very much convinced of Patrick Geddes' theory we just discussed, and they were also proposing an alternative to the congested city. They made a very nice movie called The City in 1938, which is a very strong criticism of the difficult living conditions in these congested places. You can find that movie on YouTube. And then they proposed an alternative, a new green city with decentralized production. And they could implement their idea in a vast program at the scale of an entire state. The Tennessee was the poorest state in the US in the 1930s after the big economical crisis. And so their plan was to implement a number of dams along the river that would help controlling flood risk, produce electricity, but also linked to it a number of communities. So you see major infrastructure investment that would benefit the entire state and country, but then have a number of smaller settlements linked to that for the management and combine literally infrastructure, energy, and distributed model settlements. It's called the Tennessee Valley Authority Project. In Russia, there were also innovative ideas for the socialist city, which is all about emancipation of at the individual level. So two architects here who were part of a group called OZA, like the research group here. They would reject the idea of the traditional centralized city, which they saw as the embodiment of capitalism, and also thought with the new technologies we could imagine abandoning the metropolis in favor of a diffuse horizontal society, a townless, fully decentralized and evenly populated country. So they proposed a housing module that would be called the pod house, and that you could assemble, disassemble easily, and also combine. So depending on your family situation, when you're single, you have your box, but if you get married, you have a son and a child, but if you get divorced, you can split again. And these modules would be, in their view, distributed on a regular isotropic network of transportation covering the entire territory of USSR. So it was just a proposal that shows a bit the ideology of how we could imagine the future of urbanization in a very radical, extreme solution. They made it a bit more concentrated in a city model called Magnitogorsk in Russia. Maybe you know this.
I just wanted to say about it is not just proposal about this project type of houses. They actually tried some
Yes.
to build here, but I understood that in such big cities like they designed it for St. Petersburg, for instance, and it is actually didn't work, and it was just one house and like very well known concept.
And is it still, did they make a replique? How do you know about it? Because you learned about it, or is it still visible, this house?
It is not visible. We have just photos. And
I know, okay.
we have it in our program.
would be nice to make one. No, it's not a big one. And sometimes some of these old models are rebuilt, like the pavilion by Mies van der Rohe, or could be a nice. Thank you. I didn't know that. Thank you. And then the last one, the idea of distributed, diffuse, dispersed urbanization as an ideal is by Frank Lloyd Wright, who's mainly famous for his architecture. But then on the side, he would have his secret project, like with no commissioner, for a suburban development concept that he published in a book called The Disappearing City, and as again a rejection of the dense city centers, and really believing in the potential of new technologies, automobile, telephone, allowing for people, families, to occupy the entire country. So he proposed a sort of grid model. So it's called broad acre city. Every family would get at least 1 acre of land, and he really made it seriously, because so he made a model like it's 12 by 12 foot, which corresponds to 3.7 meters by 3.7. And he spent 25 years of his life imagining this ideal city. So it would be made out of prefabricated house, supporting therefore a decentralized model of society, a new family-based civilization with no cities, no towns, and no central government. So kind of very liberal, but at the same time family-related mode of settlement. So it was, it still has an influence. It's quite impressive in terms of the visionary aspect, because many things he was dreaming of more than 100 years ago, almost, a bit less. But so you see the cars, they were like flying things that look like drones today. Were very like forward-looking, and to some extent have been realized. So he made also a kind of text